In today's video, I'm going to share with you the one scalping rule that was the missing piece in my trading. Once I understood this, it gave me an edge in the markets and made me a consistently profitable trader. And what I'm talking about is relative strength and weakness. This is one of the most important concepts but rarely talked about. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Okay, so in today's video, we're going to be talking about relative strength and weakness. And this is one of the most powerful trading tools that you can use on a day-to-day basis. If you were to ask me if I want a specific setup, any specific criteria in the markets, relative strength and weakness, if you're able to determine if something is relatively strong or if it's relatively weak, you can have a crazy edge in the markets by just understanding the relative strength and weakness on a stock or asset. So in today's video, we're going to talk about relative strength and weakness, exactly what relative strength and weakness is, different types of relative strength and weakness. This is a topic that we discuss on the channel quite a bit. I haven't had a dedicated video on exactly what relative strength and weakness is. So this is a full-on guide on exactly what to do and how to determine relative strength and weakness. And of course, we're going to be going over some examples at the end of the video. So with that being said, let's go on to what is relative strength and weakness. So relative strength and weakness is essentially comparing a stock or instrument in relation to the market as a whole. For example, if you're trading the tech stocks, you'll be comparing it to the NASDAQ. So when we're ever trading an asset class or an instrument, we always want to compare it to something. That's a good way to gauge how strong of a name you're trading or how weak of a name you're trading. Tesla is within the NASDAQ or the QQQ. So what we're going to do is compare Tesla to the QQQ to understand if it's relatively strong or relatively weak or neutral. For example, if we're trading Costco, we can compare this to the SPY because Costco is within the S&P 500. We're always going to be comparing the tech name or the stock in correlation to the overall index. And the reason why we use relative strength and weakness is when trading momentum, we want to compare what is relatively weak or relatively strong compared to the overall market. Whenever we're trading something, generally speaking, we want to be trading the name that it's leading towards the upside. We want to be trading the name that has the strongest strength. If we're in a bull market and we're trading the weakest name, it's going to be very hard to trade because it's lagging the market. Whereas if we're trading the main ticker that's leading the market, that is going to have the most strength. So if the markets are pushing higher, the name that you're trading is most likely going to push even more because it's relatively strong compared to the market. And that basically goes into my next point, which is in an uptrend, look for the strongest name to long, and in a downtrend, look for the weakest name to short. So this is a great rule of thumb when you're looking to trade on the higher time frames and intraday as well. It'll save you a lot from unnecessary trade. If you're longing a name and it's relatively weak compared to the market, you have to be very careful because if the market does want to stall or potentially reverse, your name is going to be the first one to drop just based off the relative weakness. Same thing for relative strength. If you're longing a name with relative strength and the market consolidates, there's a good chance your name can even go higher just because the relative strength that it has compared to the market. So with this being said, you can see how powerful identifying relative strength and weakness is. And this is a tool that we can use. It's not an exact setup. So understanding relative strength and weakness is a little bit more discretionary and it takes more experience. But if we're able to consistently identify relative strength and weakness, we will have a huge edge in the markets and understanding exactly what we should and what we shouldn't be trading. So let's go on to the different types of scenarios and how to gauge relative strength and weakness. And there's 4 different scenarios that we can be looking for. Something to mention here is that relative strength and weakness is a tool that we can use in our trading. There's not an exact strategy or setup on how to use relative strength and weakness. It is a little bit more discretionary and it does take experience to understand. So let's go on to the scenarios that we do have. Number 1 is our first scenario where the Qs is consolidating. As you can see, it's in between your support and resistance levels, whereas the name that you're playing is breaking out. So the way I have this set up is that we have the QQQ and we have the tech names on the right hand side. So basically what we're doing here is trading the tech name in correlation to the QQQ. So the tech name can be Tesla, AMD, Nvidia, Apple, anything that's within the NASDAQ, we can be looking to trade and we can be looking for relative strength and weakness. So this is a case where tech is breaking out and we're continuing towards the upside, whereas the Qs is consolidating. This is a sign of relative strength. Number two is the Qs is breaking up and it's also in an uptrend along with the tech name in itself. So the tech name is just more relatively strong compared to the Qs, but in this case, right, the Qs is also an uptrend. So this is a sign of relative strength as well. Number three, what we have is the Qs comes down to take out a form of liquidity. It could be bouncing off a key level support. It can be sweeping liquidity. As you can see right here, we have the Qs in a range, comes down, takes out your key level support, reclaims a key level, pushes back towards the upside. Whereas at the exact same time, tech is breaking out, whereas Qs is coming to a key level support. So this is a great sign that tech is bullish. And if the Qs does want to reverse, we can expect the tech name to reverse back towards the upside as well. And then the fourth scenario, which is an outlier scenario, whereas the Qs is in a clear downtrend, it's actually breaking lower and pushing lower towards the downside, whereas your tech is breaking out. So this is a scenario where whenever the tech is showing this type of relative strength, it usually has nothing to do with the market and everything to do with news. So this will only occur when you have some sort of news event that's happening in the market, or there's a catalyst, or someone knows something's happening. So you'll have extreme relative strength where it's diverging. I would consider this more of divergence, where the markets are heading in the opposite direction. Whereas generally speaking, relative strength, they're heading in the same direction. So with this being said, we understand now the different scenarios that we will look for when gauging relative strength and weakness. Now we're going to go into each scenario more in depth. And of course, we're going to explain examples. And then at the end of the video, we're going to go over some live trading examples on how we use relative strength and weakness in real time. Now let's go on to the first scenario. So the first scenario that we have here is the Qs is in consolidation, whereas the tech name in this case is trending towards the upside. And this is a classic form of relative strength and weakness when, as you can see, the Qs is stuck in a range in between its support and resistance levels. The Qs on the lower time frames is just consolidating. It's not really doing too much, and this happens fairly often with the overall market just because the overall SPY and Qs generally aren't trending. Whereas if you're looking on any sort of tech name, you'll see that tech names trend quite often. It might not be the same name every day, but you'll see higher time frame breakouts. There's about 100 different tech names within the NASDAQ, so at least a few of those names will be trending every single day. So in this case, what we have is the tech name. As you can see, you end up breaking outside of its key level of resistance here while the Qs is in consolidation. We'll go over an example here in a second, but the tech name that we're trading is breaking out and closing above. That's key, right? We want to have strong candle closures. If you can have a strong candle close, now what we like to see is this level be used as support. So what's happening here is that our tech name is breaking above our key level of resistance. Now we can expect this to start trending towards the upside. And what's great about this setup is that it's very minimal risk. What we're going to be looking for now is the markets, at least on the tech side, to start trending, whereas the Qs, it's still in consolidation. So this one has relative strength, and this is going to be the leading ticker if it wants to push higher, because now it's showing strength. It's actually breaking outside of the resistance level. If it wanted to be neutral, it would just follow along with what the Qs is doing, but it's showing strength here. It's tipping its hand, and now there's a potential opportunity in the markets to capture this trade towards the upside. So what does this look like on a chart? So as you can see right here, this is a more recent example. This is on the Oracle daily chart. So you can see the daily chart here. We're gapping up on the overall markets. We're still going to use our higher time frames as well to give us more context on the overall markets. So we had earnings, we're gapping up, we have clear shots towards your all-time highs. We're fairly bullish here on the daily chart. So coming into market open, you can see what we have here on Oracle. So I have the Oracle chart pulled up behind, and I also have the QQQ chart pulled up right in front of it. As you can see right here, what we're going to do is mark out our opening range candles. So as you can see for the SPY and Qs, we're going to mark out our opening range candles. And within the first 5 minutes, you can see that Oracle has a really big push higher. We end up having a big push higher. We break above a key level in the after hours, which was our earnings key key pivot level. Whereas the Qs, as you can see, it's really just kind of consolidating, right? It broke above your opening range, but really didn't have too much continuation above your opening range. Let me actually zoom in here just so you guys can see this as well. So I zoomed in just a little bit better, but you can see right within the first 5 minutes on Oracle, we're having a really strong push towards the upside, whereas the Qs overall within the first 5 minutes is consolidating. You can see we're basically within inside of its 5 minute range, whereas Oracle is breaking out. So this is a sign where, along with the higher time frames, if you're able to identify this in the pre-market and confirm your thesis in the actual market hours, you can be looking for this trade back up and towards where your all-time highs and above. And you can see in this case, Qs is basically in consolidation, whereas Oracle had this nice trend towards the upside. And if you're able to identify this within the first 5 to 10 minutes of market open, you are able to make a decent amount of money just based off the relative strength and weakness as well. You don't even have to have a setup. The setup's not always going to be perfect when it comes to relative strength and weakness. What's more important here is the actual strength in itself. So now we're going on to the next day here on Oracle, and you can see we're going to mark out our opening range candle on the 5 minute, and you can see Oracle pushing towards the upside. So you can see we're trending higher here, whereas the overall Qs after the first 5 minutes has really been inside of its 5 minute range. So you can see right here, we have the time pulled up. What we have is Oracle right at 10 o'clock or at 9:59 to be exact. We're basically retesting your 5 minute range high, where in this case, the QQQ is within its middle of the range. So you can see the Qs rejected off your 5 minute range high. We're actually pulling back in towards our 1 minute opening range. And you can see as Oracle is at the top of the range, QQQ is coming back into the middle of the range. This is a clear sign of relative strength on Oracle. So if we were looking for a buy setup, we can have an entry once this candle closes with a stop break underneath your 5 minute range low, looking for this push back towards the upside versus the QQQ, where you can see there's not really any setup here because the Qs is within inside of its range. Now you can see right Qs basically just went from your 5 minute range high to your 5 minute range low, whereas Oracle had a clear uptrend towards the highs based off of not only the daily time frame, also based off of relative strength and weakness intraday as well. With this being said, let's go on to scenario number 2. And scenario number 2 is the Qs being bullish along with the tech name being bullish as well. This is one of my personal favorites because we can expect the markets to move higher. We can expect the tech name to move higher. So this is when the markets are in clear effect, when everything's trending. This is the best form of relative strength and the one that you should have the most conviction in, because a lot of the times the markets are going to move higher, your tech name is going to move higher as well. So as you can see right here, what we have is the Qs breaking above a key resistance level. Now we're in a clear uptrend. We're making higher lows in the market. Similar to the right hand side, our tech name is also making higher lows in the market, signaling that there's relative strength in play. And what does this look like on a chart? So as you can see right here, what we have is AMD. So AMD, this is an example a few days ago, and AMD number one had news. So we had news here in the pre-market, and that's what ended up pushing AMD higher as well. And we also had a lot of strength intraday. So within the first 5 minutes, you can see for AMD, we're clearly showing strength in the market. So what we're going to do is mark out our 5 minute opening range. We have our 5 minute high marked out here on the QQQ. We also have your 5 minute high marked out here on AMD. You can see within the first couple of minutes, AMD breaks above your 5 minute high, retests your 5 minute high at this 941 level, and continues higher. Whereas the QQQ, you can see we're still in a clear uptrend. You can see higher lows are being built, but AMD is clearly the one with relative strength because we're breaking above your 5 minute high, retesting and pushing higher. The QQQ retested your 5 minute range high much later, about 10 minutes later into the session. 10 minutes later here on AMD, we're already well above your 5 minute range high, and we could expect this to continue higher. So this is a great example of the Qs being bullish along with AMD, but AMD is just a little bit more bullish in this case. And this is the name you can see exploded higher, while the Qs end up having a nice move higher. This one ultimately was the one that had the most relative strength. So let's go on to scenario number 3. And scenario number 3 is when the QQQ comes down to sweep liquidity. So we're basically in sort of a range here as well. You can see the Qs either can bounce at support or come down and sweep liquidity. This is what we can expect when the markets are ranging, is a lot of reversals, a lot of bounces off support, rejections off resistance. This is similar to scenario number 1, but in this case, whenever we we have a name that is retesting at the exact same time the market is sweeping liquidity. This is one of my favorite setups with relative strength because we can expect the markets to hold this level, which is your resistance turn to support, as long as the markets are bouncing off key levels of support and sweeping this liquidity. So this is, right, a very strong form of a potential reversal, because if the markets are going to sweep liquidity and reverse back towards upside, then there's a very good chance that the markets are not only going to have a push towards high of day, we're also going to have continuation as well, because the markets are expected to reverse. So what does this look like on a chart? So a chart in this case is TSM versus the QQQ. I have TSM in this case just because it's a semiconductor. Whenever you're comparing it, you can compare it to the Qs, you can compare it to the other ETF, which it belongs to SMH. I just have the Qs, so it's nice and easy in this case. But as you can see right here, what we have is the 5-minute range setup. So we have TSM breaking above your 5-minute range high, whereas the QQQ is basically inside of its range. So it's inside of its range, and now you can see the Qs is coming back down to key levels of support. Right at your 1032, you can expect the markets to have some sort of reaction off of your 5-minute opening range low. And at the exact same time at 1032, you can see that TSM presents a buying setup, which is going to be your 5-minute opening range high. You can see the markets perfectly bounce at the exact same time. So at 1032, you can see TSM perfectly retested your 5-minute opening range high, presented a buying opportunity for a push higher, whereas the markets are bouncing off of your low of day, key level support, and we expect this to reverse where? Back up and towards high of day. And you can see that TSM ended up reversing back up and towards your previous day highs and above here. This is a great example of looking at the Qs to come down to sweep liquidity and bounce off support, whereas TSM creating the higher lows, and now we can expect the markets to push back higher. Now let's go on to the final example that we have. So now we're on our final scenario that we have. It's scenario number 4, and this is when the Qs is actually diverging away. So I would consider this divergence. What we have is the markets are in a clear downtrend. So the Qs are pushing lower, whereas the name that we're trading is actually diverging away from the actual overall market. So you can see tech is now pushing higher, or your tech name, for example. Let's say this is Tesla, it's diverging away from the QQQ. What we want to do is look for, right, continuation higher versus the overall market. In my opinion, this is a very difficult to trade, just because whenever the markets are in a clear downtrend and your name is actually showing strength, there's a good chance that if the market does want to keep dumping, that your name can get dragged down with the overall market here as well. So this is something we don't trade fairly often because it is a lot more discretionary, and it's really based off of the actual news event in the market. This only occurs when someone knows something's up and it's really pushing the markets higher. So we'll talk about some examples and how we can use this. As I mentioned, it's really more discretionary. So an example in this case is Apple. Apple been relatively weak compared to the overall market. Every pop has just been sold into. So as you can see here, within the first 5 minutes, Apple ends up, right, pushing higher. So within the first 5 minutes, Apple pushes higher where the markets end up dropping. So Apple is showing some relative strength, and then all of a sudden you can see Apple starts dropping here, and then Qs starts to reverse. So Apple is really doing the complete opposite of the overall market. Generally speaking, if Apple moves higher, Qs moves higher. If Apple moves down, the Qs moves down. But in this scenario, right, Apple is doing the complete opposite of the overall market. You can see Apple underneath your 5-minute range low, whereas the Qs is above your 5-minute range high. This is basically diverging away from the overall index, which is the QQQ. And in my opinion, very difficult to trade because you're going to get faked out quite often. The only time you're able to trade this is when there's a clear relative strength or weakness, or when we have news in the market. So this is something that we will look for from time to time, especially if we have major news events. But I prefer the first 3 scenarios over this one, which is scenario number 4. So with this being said, let's hop over onto TradingView and go over some examples on exactly how to determine relative strength and weakness in real time. So as you can see, we're on our first example and we're currently on AMD. This is a more recent example, and this is a great illustration of relative strength and weakness and how we can use this potentially to our advantage. So on the right hand side, you can see I have AMD pulled up, and on the left hand side, we're comparing AMD in this case to the QQQ. The reason being AMD is a part of the QQQ. So this is our correlating index that we can be using to gauge the relative strength and weakness on AMD. So coming into market open, you can see what we have plot out here is our previous day highs along with their previous day lows. You can see here on the QQQ on the left hand side, we also have the same thing. Currently, AMD is showing some relative strength here in the pre-market. We're actually above our previous day highs. So now what we like to see is really potential continuation towards the upside here right off the bat. Whenever you have strength in the pre-market, it's not end all be all. Pre-market action does have less volume, but it can be an indication of potentially what's to come in the actual market hours. So now let's play out the tape here on the lower timeframes. So coming into the first few minutes here on AMD, we're fairly neutral on both sides. AMD of course does have relative strength because now it's bouncing off your previous day highs, whereas the QQQ is currently underneath your previous day high. So let's keep playing out the tape to see if there is more strength that comes into the market. So what we have here now on the QQQ, we have our first 5 minutes played out. You can see we have our 5 minute high along with our 5 minute low. You can see similar thing to AMD on the right hand side. We have our 5 minute high and low marked out. As I mentioned, AMD is above your previous day highs, whereas the QQQ currently underneath your previous day highs. What we like to see on AMD, if it does want to continue to show strength, is a break above your 5 minute range. So as you can see for AMD, we're breaking above your 5 minute high, whereas the Qs has failed to break above your 5 minute high as of right now. So currently AMD is relatively strong compared to the QQQ. I wouldn't say currently it's insanely relatively strong compared to the market, but let's keep playing out the tape here. So now you can clearly see that we have relative strength in the markets within the first 15 minutes. Right off the bat, if you did want it to be a little bit more aggressive, right, you could have identified AMD showing some relative strength compared to the Qs. But now for a fact, we know that AMD has relative strength, so we can look for any sort of pullbacks on this name for a continued push higher. So right here for AMD, you can see the clear relative strength compared to the QQQ, right? The Qs is just flirting around your previous day highs, whereas AMD clearly showing some strength compared to the overall market. This is a name, right, that you can honestly just buy just based off of the relative strength here compared to the Qs. So let's say if we wanted to get in AMD long, super tight stop, what we could be looking for is just a fix 1 to 2 back towards the upside. This is a name where just strictly based off the relative strength, you don't even need a setup. The setup's not always going to be perfect when trading relative strength, but what's more important is the actual relative strength in itself instead of the setup. So in this case, if we're looking for a potential kind of setup, you can see so far we're getting bought back up. This is your first pullback here as well. Now you can see the Qs are breaking above. What we'd be looking for is the push above your high of day plus continuation. And you can see right there for AMD, we're end up pushing nicely towards the upside. You can see every single down close candle is respected. The QQQ actually had a nice retest off your 5 minute range high here as well. And that's why we end up pushing higher on the Q. So as you can see, based off the relative strength here compared to the QQQ, AMD ended up having nice continuation higher, right? This was just based off the relative strength that we're able to determine within the first 15 minutes of market open. Now you can use any single down close candles being your 5 minute range, your 15 minute range, any sort of order blocks for potential continuation higher. Now let's go on to an example that I personally took in real time. All right, so we're on a second example here on Tesla. To give a little bit more context, we're on the 5 minute time frame. You can see we have our previous day highs, previous day lows marked out, coming to market open, Qs in the middle of the range. Whereas Tesla, we're currently breaking above here in the pre-market. So as I mentioned, pre-market strength can potentially be an indication of what's to come, at least right off the bat within the first 10 to 15 minutes of market open. So we are going to keep an eye out on Tesla above your previous day highs. Now let's go back onto the 1 minute time frame. Now let's play out the tape. So as you can see, within the first 2 minutes of market open, look at the difference between Tesla versus the QQQ. The Qs has very two small candles here, whereas Tesla is showing immediate buying above its previous day highs, and we're having a huge push towards the upside. Tesla here moved about 5 points within the first 2 minutes of market open, and this is a clear indication of relative strength. On Tesla, the levels I actually have marked out on this day, if we go back onto the higher time frames here, is number one, we had this level marked out, which is our 294. As you can see, this is our key high. Now let's go back onto the lower time frames. What I'll be looking for on Tesla now is really the break above your 294, potential immediate retest for this continued push towards the upside. As you can see for Tesla, we had a wick in towards this 294, strong candle close above. This is personally where I got in just based off of the relative strength. You can see the setup here is just based off of the relative strength in itself. We had an immediate break and retest, but this is not a setup we normally take. But as I mentioned, the setup sometimes isn't always perfect when you're trading with relative strength and weakness. What I was looking for was a entry with a stop, just a break below. And in this case, I was looking for continuation towards the upside here, just based off the relative strength compared to the overall market. Now let's see how this plays out. And you can see Tesla, we end up having a really explosive move towards the upside. I personally got in really quick and really aggressive because I was able to identify relative strength really within the first 2 minutes of market open. There was also another setup that formed here later into the session as well off your 5-minute break and retest. This was still a super solid setup here as well. You can see during this time period, Qs was bouncing off your support level. So as I mentioned, this is really scenario number 1 and 3 combined. And you can also see right here at this 9:53 as QQQ came down to sweep liquidity, you can see Tesla was holding a key level of support, and that's why we end up having this explosive move towards the upside. So this ended up being one of the best trades for me for the month of May, just being able to identify the higher timeframes along with the intraday relative strength. I'm also going to pop up my execution so you guys know that I did take this in real time. And with that being said, let's get right into the live session. It's going to be this 568 along with this 566. As for my top watch now, you can see Tesla showing a lot of strength here in the pre-market. We talked about this one earlier into the session, how it had strength. Now you can see we're actually breaking outside this in the pre-market. This one has a lot of strength. Qs consolidating inside of its previous range. Tesla showing some strength here above its previous day highs. Tesla, this one, really solid setup. If we can retest its previous day highs for this continued push back towards the upside. Tesla does have a lot of room back up and towards now. It's going to be the top of the range being this 295. So what I would like to see, hold above your previous day highs and use this level of support for this continued push back towards upside. So that's what we'll be looking for. So as you can see right here, coming into the day, Tesla's showing a lot of relative strength compared to the overall markets. What we're now going to have marked out here is this box high. And what we're going to be looking for is really this continued push towards the upside right off the bat towards your 295 and above here on Tesla. So far, Tesla's showing a lot of strength here with the Qs. We're trying to get back above this 490, but you can see Tesla, a lot of strength up and towards our top of the range here now being this 294. Yeah, Tesla very bullish, as you can see above that 294 here. Now, really for Tesla, you just be looking for the break above your 294 and immediate retest for a continuation high. You can see a little bit of reaction here off the Qs, which is this 40.90.80. Tesla, really solid push up and towards this 295. So as you can see so far, Tesla, really solid push right off the bat. We got outside of your previous day's range. You can see a really strong push above this 295. What I'm basically looking for now, hold of this 295 since we have relative strength for this continued push towards the upside versus the QQQs. For Tesla, this was basically a higher time frame breakout. It's based off the relative strength within the first few minutes here as well. We can expect this to have continuation. As for Tesla now, this 295 is key. You're either going to be looking, we're most likely going to be waiting for the break above your 295 now and an immediate retest for a potential continuation. All right, with this Tesla strength, I'm going to get started here on the 300s on Tesla. This one's showing a lot of relative strength. I'll look to add on all pullbacks back up towards 300, but my risk is going to be this 295 pivot level. This one, a lot of strength coming to market open. My area is, if as long as it maintains this 294, I expect this to continue towards the upside. So as you can see right there, just based off the relative strength here on Tesla, I took some of the 300 calls. It is so strong compared to the overall market. Higher time frame breakout. Whenever Tesla does have these breakouts like this, sometimes you have to understand the ticker personality, and Tesla's just so strong. I'm expecting all dips to get bought up for this continued push towards the upside. So this one's based off of your risk amount being that 295, and we can expect Tesla to move higher. So as you can see so far, Tesla getting this nice reaction off your 9 EMA along with your 5-minute opening range here as well. As long as we maintain above your 298, I like to see Tesla push up and towards 300 and above on the higher time frames. 303.94 is that daily high that we have the next level here for Tesla. Tesla pushing nicely towards upside, holding that 9 EMA, holding that 5-minute opening range. Now we're getting above key levels being that 300 key psych. We just want to see every single down close candle be respected, and we just want to continue back up and towards the next levels that we have, which is 303.94 and above. But yeah, as you can see right there, I sped up the tape, but Tesla, super nice retest off your 5-minute opening range. End up just having continuation. You can see this huge trend towards the upside. This is just relative strength compared to the Qs. You can see Qs is inside of its range in the first 30 minutes. Tesla extreme relative strength with this higher time frame breakout. So this ended up being a super solid trade that we identified in the pre-market, and then we came into market open using that opening range along with the box there as well to help us capture this move towards the upside. And with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, I'd appreciate if you guys drop me a like and sub, and I'll see you guys next week for a brand new video. Peace.